What if I told you you could find bourbon that was produced by the same parent company as Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, E.H. Taylor, Eagle Rare, Weller, and Stagg at a fraction of the cost without standing in line? Would you buy it? Should you buy it? In this video, I'm going to break down Costco's Kirkland brand bourbon and forecast whether or not I think it's a bottle that you should pass on or look for on that next Costco shopping trip. Welcome into the Whiskey Weather YouTube channel, everybody. I am Brandon, a whiskey-loving meteorologist, giving you the latest forecast and trends on all things bourbon and whiskey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for joining us. Where are you watching from? Would love to hear that. Drop that in the comments below. Always love to know where these forecasts go out to. As far as the bottles we have in front of us today, I am forecasting Kirkland Bourbon. Yes, Costco's bourbon. This is Kirkland Small Batch and Kirkland Single Barrels, both Kentucky straight bourbon whiskeys, and both sold solely at Costco's. Okay, so technically Costco is a membership club and you have to buy a membership or enroll in a membership in order to shop there, and that's about $120 a year. Now, in 2023, it's estimated that there are about 128 million people that had a Costco membership. That's a lot of people. But for those of you who don't have a Costco membership, I have good news. In about 14 different states, including Texas, California, and New York, it is illegal to have a membership to purchase alcoholic beverages. So, in those states, you can walk in without being a member and buy a bottle. And speaking of membership, here's a reminder. You don't have to pay anything to be a subscriber of the Whiskey Weather YouTube channel. So, with these whiskeys, there are a lot of unknowns. Pretty much the age and the mash bill, I can't find that anywhere on the bottle. But you see, it says Kirkland Small Batch by Blanton 1792 Master Distiller. So this is juice coming from Blanton Distillery, also known as 1792. And just like 1792, they don't disclose their mash bill, and neither does the Kirkland. So I'm not really going to hold it against Costco for withholding that mash bill. It is said that the 1792 is a high rye mash bill, and the guesstimates range between about 15 to 25% rye. So that's what these are going to come in at. Being that this is coming from the same distillery of 1792, these are going to have a lot of similarities with the 1792 brands, whether that's small batch, full proof, single barrel, bottled and bond, whatever it is. As far as the Kirkland Small Batch itself, let's take a look at some of the similarities and differences. First off, the biggest difference, this comes in at 1 liter. The 1792 small batch, that comes in right at 750 milliliters. So you're already getting about 33% more whiskey. As far as the price, this small batch comes in at $19.99, while the 1792 small batch comes in with an MSRP right around $29.99, but most places right now have it for about $30 to $35. As far as the age statements, that's one of the biggest question marks, not only on these bottles, but the 1792. This has to at least be 2 years because it says Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. And by Kentucky law, you cannot call it a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey unless it has been aged in Kentucky for at least 2 years. The 1792 small batch is expected to be between 6 and 8 years. It used to have an 8-year statement. No longer is there on the bottle. So it's expected and estimated to be between about 6 and 8 years now. As far as the proof, very similar. This Kirkland Small Batch comes in right at 92 proof. The 1792 Small Batch comes in at 93.7 proof. Very, very similar. But what does it taste like? Is it anything similar to that 1792? Let's give this Small Batch a pour. Again, 92 proof. I'm going to guess that this is a little younger than your general 1792. That, again, a little more expensive. This is cheap, 20 bucks. So it would be a great value if it's any good. What's it taste like? Right off the nose, I got a little bit of a vanilla and caramel, even that earthy tone to it. There's some corn ethanol to that. Definitely that would tell me that it's got a little bit on the younger side. I do get some citrus out of this as well, but it's not overpowering. It's more so that vanilla and caramel. And after just nosing this, I'll tell you that I'm more and more convinced that the Traveler whiskey was a blend of Canadian whiskey and Barton juice, because this has a very similar nose. We touched on that Traveler whiskey review up there in that video on the top right. So on the nose, very similar. Vanilla, caramel, there is a little bit of that oak, but it's not too overpowering on the oak. Let's give it a dive and see what it tastes like. Okay, so there's some rye spice to it that doesn't come through on the nose, but it's not overpowering. 92 proof. It's still got a little bit of a punch to it for a 92 proofer, but it's really not overpowering. Very good for someone who may just be entering the whiskey game. This is not going to be something that's going to overpower you with heat and take away from those flavors. This already has a lot more flavor to it than I was expecting. There's some chocolates, definitely some of that vanilla and caramel. I'd say the finish is longer than a couple other bourbons that I think 1792 has produced. It's very oak and cinnamony on the back half of the pour. Okay, that vanilla, still, I do pull in a little bit of that citrus. Vanilla, caramel, that's definitely there for sure. As far as the finish, as I talk, I'm getting a little bit of that rye spice, but it's not too bad. I will say, for 92 proof, it's got a hotter finish. It's got like a cinnamon red hot or a hot tamales finish, but it's not terribly overpowering. Overall, it's a great value for 1792 small batch. Very good, welcoming bourbon. It is cheap, it is value, and I automatically think that it is already better than the Traveler whiskey, which again, I told you we did a review on a few weeks ago, and you can check that video in the comment section below, as well as on the Whiskey-Weather YouTube channel. This is a much better bottle than the Traveler whiskey, so I will already say that that is a great replacement for that. We touched on the 1792 and its comparisons with the small batch, but I think that this would be a perfect replacement for Buffalo Trace as well if you weren't able to find that. I've mentioned a couple of different alternatives in the video on the top right of your screen. I do think that in a pinch, this would be able to replace Blanton's. Now, one thing I will say, this is not as sweet as your general Buffalo Trace mash bill is going to be. But in a pinch, I do think that these would be alternatives to look for. This would be an alternative for these three bottles if these were something you were looking for and you wanted to save a little bit of money. As far as the single barrel, let's move on to that one. So this one, again, going to have some very good similarities to 1792. A non-chill filtered Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. This one-of-a-kind unblended bourbon comes from a single barrel hand-selected by our master distiller for its superior distinctive flavor characteristics. One big change right away, it comes in at 120 proof. But by seeing that 120, that's telling me one thing, that I don't believe that this is a true barrel proof or a true cask strength, because every single barrel that I have seen come from Kirkland or Costco comes in at 120 proof. That's not how it works. If it was a true cask strength, those would vary depending on each barrel. So I'm assuming they're proofing it down to 120. For comparisons to this bottle, I think that this is going to line up very closely with one of the 1792 offerings, the full proof. So that is the black collar 1792. They are very similar, just like that small batch and small batch from 1792. As far as the single barrel, this comes in, again, without an age statement. 2 years, though, because it does say Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. And as we touched on, 1792 has been saying 6 to 8 years on these. I will say that I was on a 1792 full proof pick earlier last year, and in the sample offerings that we had there, it ranged anywhere from 6 to about 9 years. I do believe that we heard about an 11-year one, so these vary when it comes to age. As far as the proof, I mentioned that, 120 proof on the single barrel, 125 proof on the full proof, so very close together. Nonetheless, they are similar. As far as the liter, again, you're getting a bigger bottle, more whiskey in the bottle comparative to the 1792 full proof, which is 750 milliliters. So the big deal here is the price. Single barrel coming in at $29.99. The full proof coming in at about $47.99 with an MSRP. I have seen it at several stores ranging from $50 to $60. So about double the price when it comes to these being head-to-head. So what does the single barrel taste like? Again, checking in at 120 proof, I'm going to assume that it's going to have a little bit more flavor right off the bat. So that vanilla and caramel, the same, but a little bit more potent on the nose. Very similar to the Traveler whiskey. That earth tone keeps coming through. Get a lot more oak. Some of that toasted oak on the nose. Yeah. So that vanilla is really primarily the flavor I'm getting out of this. Okay. Instantly a lot more flavor. The first thing I get is like a chocolate covered cherry, like a dark chocolate covered cherry. There's a little bit of a rye. There's grape to it as well. It's got like a sweet tarty sweetness to it. I kind of generally combine that with citrus at times. And at first it starts with a creamy mouthfeel and it turns to more of a tingling mouthfeel with that cinnamon red hots again coming through on the backside. It dries the mouth out quite a bit. I will say, I feel like my mouth is drying. It's got a lot more of that oak. It's got a lot of flavor to it, a lot more flavor than the small batch. But I wouldn't say it's overpowering at all when it comes to the heat at 120 proof. Yeah. So coming in at $29.99 comparative to that $50 to $60 range, this is a great value compared to the $17.92. But I would also say that I think that this would be a great replacement if you weren't able to find an Elijah Craig barrel proof. I'm not just talking C923, any one of the barrel proofs. This would, I don't think it'll beat it out. I would say that the Elijah Craig's still better. But this is a nice, cheaper alternative that might be a little easier to find than one of these allocated whiskeys like 1792 full proof or Elijah Craig barrel proof, or even those barrel proof store picks that you start to see from some of these folks. Now, we did the small batch, we did the single barrel. They also make a bottle and bond. I do not have the bottle and bond. I have had it in the past, thought it was fantastic. And again, for the comparison on that, we're going to do another 1792 bottle, but this time the 1792 bottle and bond. Of course, they're both going to come in at least 4 years old because that is the age statement on bottle and bond bourbons, and they both have to be 100 proof. The big deal, again, is that liter comparison. So the biggest difference between the two is going to come from the pricing, in that bottle and bond coming from Kirkland has an MSRP between $25, I've seen it as high as $27.99. The bottle and bond coming from 1792 is $39.99 for an MSRP, but a lot of stores have that up to $45, $50, and I've seen it as high as $100 at times. So what would the Kirkland bottle and bond be a good alternative to? Not only the 1792, but I think it would be a great alternative for Heaven Hill bottle and bond, Henry McKenna bottle and bond, and even in a pinch, E.H. Taylor small batch, which is also a bottle and bond whiskey. So there you go. Kirkland Bourbon is not only a good alternative for Elijah Craig and 1792 products, but I think it would be a decent replacement for Blanton's, the Traveler whiskey from Chris Stapleton, Buffalo Trace, and a couple other of those Heaven Hill products as well. If you get to a Costco and you see one of these, go grab them, because this forecast is saying that this is a very good value for the price you pay, and you get more whiskey. They're both 1 liter bottles. So I hope you got a lot out of this forecast and enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future forecasts. So remember, until the next time, it is always whiskey weather. But please remember to drink responsibly. Cheers, y'all. See you next time.